Have you ever noticed that when someone asked Jesus a sincere and profound question, he almost never answered directly? Have you ever stopped to think why the greatest teacher in history, the one who had all the answers, chose to return a question instead of giving a ready-made explanation? This attitude, which at first glance may seem evasive or even disconcerting, carries a depth that many people go their whole lives without realizing. And perhaps you have already experienced something similar, that moment when you sought a clear, objective, almost urgent answer, and all you found was more silence, more reflection, and more questions arising within you. Have you ever been through this? In the Gospels, this scene is repeated several times. A legal expert asks what he must do to inherit eternal life, and Jesus replies, "What is written? How do you read it?" Someone wants to know who is the greatest in the kingdom, and Jesus responds with a provocation that dismantles all human logic. Pilate asks one of the most famous questions in history, "What is truth?" and receives silence. Instead of ready-made answers, Jesus offers something far more challenging, an invitation to think, feel, and decide. And it is precisely there that something begins that can completely transform our spiritual mindset. Perhaps we're used to a faith that seeks shortcuts, quick fixes, and straightforward explanations to alleviate anxiety. But Jesus doesn't seem interested in simply resolving immediate doubts. He goes deeper. The questions he asks aren't meant to fill the mind with information, but to expose the heart, reveal hidden intentions, and provoke inner decisions. What you're about to discover may surprise you, because this spiritual pedagogical method of Jesus continues to work even today, including in your own faith journey. When Jesus asks a question, he shifts the person from the position of spectator to that of participant. It's impossible to remain neutral in the face of a well-placed question. It demands a stance, it demands truth, it demands responsibility. That's why Jesus' questions often cause discomfort. They break down defenses, dismantle prepared narratives, and reveal what the person may not even have known they carried within themselves. And this has a profound impact because it transforms faith into something alive, practical, and personal, not just theoretical. Think about it. Ready-made answers end conversations, but questions open paths. Answers provide momentary relief, questions initiate processes. Jesus wasn't training collectors of pretty phrases, but disciples capable of thinking, discerning, and walking with spiritual autonomy. This is a detail that changes everything when we begin to observe the behind-the-scenes aspects of Jesus' actions. Nothing there is improvised. Every silence, every question, and even every apparent evasion carries a profound intention of inner transformation. And perhaps that's why, at many points in our lives, we feel that God doesn't answer as we expected. We ask, we pray, we seek, and the answer doesn't come in the way we imagined. Instead, another question arises within us, another reflection, another internal confrontation. Isn't this part of the same method? Aren't silence and questions, in fact, a way for God to lead us to a deeper level of faith, maturity, and truth? Stay with me until the end of this content, because by understanding why Jesus asked questions instead of giving direct answers, you begin to see faith in a completely different way. Not as something passive, but as an active journey, full of decisions, revelations, and internal confrontations that shape who we truly are. Now, I want to delve even deeper into this subject, because when we begin to carefully observe these questions of Jesus, we realize that they are not stuck in the past. They continue to resonate today, perhaps right there inside you. And as we explore this line of reasoning, perhaps you're already remembering moments in your own life when a question changed everything. Sometimes it wasn't an answer that propelled you forward, but a restlessness that wouldn't leave you in peace. A question that kept echoing, that affected your decisions, your mindset, and even the way you see God. If this topic resonates with you, leave a comment below about what has touched you the most so far. It could be an experience, an old doubt, or even a question that hasn't yet found an answer. This space exists precisely for that reason, for us to walk together and learn from each other. When you comment, it's not just another number below the video. It's a real story connecting with another. It's someone on the other side of the screen realizing they're not alone on this journey of faith, in those inner workings that almost no one sees. Your participation here is what makes this channel grow and reach more people who are also seeking meaning, truth, and spiritual transformation amidst their own questions. And if this content is helping you see Jesus in a deeper and more human way, Liking the video is a simple but powerful way to signal that this type of message needs to continue being delivered. Subscribing to the channel is also part of this. Not as an empty commitment, but as a conscious choice to engage with content that provokes reflection, challenges easy certainties, and helps build a more mature and vibrant faith. Each subscription strengthens this space for conversation, study, and revelations that go beyond the surface. And all of this creates a community where questions are not seen as a lack of faith, but as an essential part of spiritual growth. So, as we continue reflecting on this unique method of Jesus, made up of questions, silences, and glances that reveal more than entire speeches, let this video become a space for exchange. Because faith is also built this way in dialogue, in listening, and in the courage to look inward. And now, maintaining this atmosphere of frank conversation, I want to continue advancing this idea, because the more we observe Jesus' questions attentively, the more we realize that they not only challenged those who listened at that time, but continue to challenge our way of living, believing, and deciding today. Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject, because when we carefully observe the questions Jesus asked, we realize that they were never random or merely intellectual. They had a very clear target, the heart. Jesus didn't seem interested in winning debates, impressing with logic, or delivering answers that sounded good to the ears. He was interested in revealing what was hidden behind the words, intentions, and even questions that people thought were sincere. And that's where things start to get more uncomfortable, because the heart is a territory that most of us try to protect. Ready-made answers tend to be safe. They give us a sense of control, organize our thoughts, and allow us to move forward without major internal upheavals. Questions, on the other hand, disrupt. They expose contradictions, reveal fears, and lay bare desires that we don't always want to admit. When Jesus asks, "Why do you call me good?" or "What do you want me to do for you?" he is not seeking information. He is leading the person to see themselves. And this has a profound impact on the spiritual journey because it changes the mindset of the one who is listening. There is a hidden truth in all of this that goes unnoticed by many people. Questions reveal more about the one who answers than about the one who asks. Jesus knew this. He knew that, by returning a question, he was placing the person before themselves. There was no way to outsource the answer, no way to repeat a prepared speech learned in the synagogue or in religious tradition. It was necessary to decide. And decisions, when they are internal and conscious, generate real transformation, not just the appearance of faith. Consider how many times, throughout the Gospels, people approach Jesus with seemingly spiritual questions, but laden with personal interests, fear of losing status, or a desire for self-preservation. The rich young man asks about eternal life, but flees when Jesus' question reveals the attachment he didn't want to confront. The Pharisees ask to test him, but end up unmasked by their own intentions. Jesus' questions function like a mirror. They don't directly accuse, but reflect what's inside. And we don't always like what we see. This method is profoundly pedagogical and spiritual at the same time. Jesus doesn't create followers dependent on external answers, but people capable of discerning, reflecting, and maturing internally. He doesn't deliver packaged truths. He leads on a journey. And every true journey involves internal confrontation, a review of beliefs, a change of mindset, and often, pain. It's not comfortable to realize that the faith we thought was solid might be based on wrong expectations or weak motivations. And this didn't stay confined to the past. Even today, many people are frustrated because they seek only quick answers from God for complex problems. They want a solution, but they don't want to face the process. They want relief, but not transformation. But Jesus' questions continue to echo, crossing centuries, reaching the depths of our emotional and spiritual lives. They force us to slow down, to look honestly inward, and to realize that faith is not just knowing the right answer, but being willing to change when the truth emerges. There is something profoundly liberating in this, even if it hurts at first. When a question reveals what is hidden, it also opens space for healing, growth, and maturity. Jesus doesn't expose his heart to humiliate, but to restore. The confrontation he provokes is not destructive, it is constructive. He dismantles false securities to build a more authentic faith, less performative and more rooted in truth. Perhaps that's why so many people walked away sad after hearing a question from Jesus. Not because he was harsh, but because the question demanded a decision the person wasn't yet ready to make. And this leads us to reflect on our own journey. How many questions from God have we avoided? How many inner anxieties have we tried to silence with quick answers, ready-made phrases, or superficial religiosity? When we understand that questions generate confrontation, but also spiritual growth, something changes in the way we face silence, doubts, and even crises. They cease to be signs of failure and become invitations to mature. Jesus didn't just want to inform minds, he wanted to transform lives. And transformation almost never happens without difficult questions along the way. As we continue to reflect on this consistent pattern in Jesus' teachings, it becomes increasingly clear that something even deeper is happening behind these questions. They not only reveal the human heart, but also point to how God relates to us, respecting our time, our choices, and our inner process. And it is precisely here that this conversation begins to touch on an even more sensitive and revealing level, because some of Jesus' questions not only expose who we are, but lead us to perceive who he truly is. Comment below, "This makes sense to me." Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject, because when we carefully observe how Jesus teaches, it becomes clear that he doesn't act like an ordinary teacher. Jesus isn't interested in merely forming attentive listeners, much less repeaters of religious discourses. His focus has always been on forming disciples, people in transformation, people willing to walk, make mistakes, reflect, decide, and mature along the way. And that's exactly where questions come in as a central tool of his spiritual pedagogical method. When Jesus asks questions, he calls the person into the process. He doesn't place the listener in a passive position, simply sitting and absorbing information. He pulls them to the center of the conversation, forcing an internal participation. The person needs to think, feel, and take a stand. This completely changes the dynamics of learning. It's no longer about memorizing correct answers, but about developing discernment, awareness, and spiritual responsibility. This type of teaching generates a lasting impact because it affects the mindset, not just knowledge. There is something deeply intentional about this. Jesus knows that real transformation doesn't happen from the outside in. It begins within, in how a person sees themselves, God, and life. Questions have this power. They break automatic patterns, interrupt inherited beliefs held without reflection, and expose the underlying reasons behind the decisions we make every day. When Jesus asks, "Who do you say I am?" he is not merely seeking a verbal confession. He is revealing that the answer to this question defines the entire journey of that disciple. Jesus' teaching method is neither casual nor improvised. He understands that spiritual maturity doesn't come from ready-made answers, but from lived experiences. Therefore, instead of offering quick solutions, he plants questions that continue to work within the person long after the encounter. These are questions that accompany and mature along with the person on their journey. And this is something rare, even uncomfortable, because we prefer quick certainties to long processes. But Jesus doesn't work superficially. He works with depth. This method also reveals a profound respect for human freedom. Jesus doesn't force conclusions. He presents paths and allows each person to decide whether or not to follow them. Asking is a way of honoring the other person's conscience. It's as if he were saying, "I can show you, but you need to choose." And conscious choices shape character, faith, and identity. There is no spiritual maturity without decisions made. And decisions only become real when the person understands what is at stake. Throughout the Gospels, it becomes evident that those who allowed themselves to answer Jesus' questions honestly underwent transformation. Peter changes his view of himself and of the Messiah. The Samaritan woman reevaluates her entire history. The blind man begins to see much more than just with his eyes. In all these encounters, the question is not a detail, it is the turning point. It opens space for revelations that go beyond the religious logic of the time and reach the essence of the human being. This type of teaching also requires time. Jesus is in no hurry to complete processes. He walks with the disciples, allows doubts, tolerates mistakes, and repeats questions in different ways along the way. This shows that mature faith is not born in a single moment, but from continuous construction. Today's question prepares the ground for tomorrow's revelation. And this changes the way we approach our own spiritual journey. Instead of anxiety for immediate answers, a greater willingness to learn along the way emerges. When we understand this, we realize that many spiritual frustrations stem from wrong expectations. We expect God to function like an instruction manual when He presents Himself as a master who walks beside us. We expect quick answers when He is shaping character. Jesus' questions teach us to slow down, to reflect, and to allow the truth to reveal itself in due time. This process molds a more solid faith, less dependent on momentary emotions and more rooted in constructed convictions. There's a hidden truth in this method that isn't always comfortable. Learning from Jesus requires a willingness to change. You can't answer His questions and remain exactly the same. Something always needs to be adjusted, abandoned, or rebuilt. And that explains why so many people prefer ready-made answers. They inform, but they don't transform. Questions transform, but they also confront. And Jesus never promised comfort above truth. As we continue to explore this spiritual pedagogical method, it becomes clear that Jesus' questions are not merely teaching tools, but bridges to a deeper relationship with God. They not only teach something new, but reveal who we are becoming along the way. And when this realization begins to sink in, an even broader understanding emerges of why Jesus chose to teach in this way and what it means for our faith today. Comment below, I'm on this journey too. Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject, because there's a subtle, almost invisible detail that many people ignore when they read the Gospels in a hurry. It's not just Jesus' question that teaches, but the space that arises after it. The interval, the silence. That moment when the answer doesn't come immediately and the person is left alone with their own conscience. This space is uncomfortable, unsettling, and at the same time, profoundly formative. It is there that faith ceases to be theory and begins to become experience. When Jesus asks a question and doesn't answer immediately, He intentionally creates a void. And human beings don't deal well with emptiness. We rush to fill it with explanations, justifications, distractions, or ready-made answers. But Jesus seems comfortable with this silence. He knows that it is in this space that something begins to reveal itself. The question keeps echoing, working internally, stirring up old beliefs, exposing contradictions, forcing an internal review. This silence is not a lack of care. It is part of the method. This interval between the question and the answer functions like an extended mirror. Without Jesus' immediate response, the person is forced to look inward and perceive what they truly believe. Not what they repeat, not what they've learned to say, but what sustains their decisions when no one is watching. This process builds spiritual responsibility. Faith ceases to be dependent on an external voice and becomes a conviction built within, in the silent struggle between fear, hope, and truth. How many times in real life do we find ourselves in exactly this place? You pray, you ask, you seek direction, and the sky seems silent. No clear answer, no immediate sign, only the weight of waiting. And in this space, even deeper questions arise. What do I truly trust in? What moves me? Why does this bother me so much? This silence, which many interpret as abandonment, may be precisely the environment where faith is being shaped. There is a hidden truth in this process that is not always comfortable to admit. If God answered everything immediately, perhaps we would never mature. Silence forces reflection, compels conscious choices. It demands a less childish and more responsible mindset. Jesus doesn't want followers who only move forward when they receive clear orders, but disciples capable of discerning, deciding, and remaining even when the answer has not yet come. This type of faith is more resilient, deeper, and less dependent on circumstances. Behind the scenes of spiritual life, it is in this silence that many important decisions are made. Decisions that are not born from the emotion of the moment, but from a conviction built with time, pain, and honesty. When Jesus asks something and remains silent, He is, in a way, saying, "Now it's up to you." And this can be frightening because it takes us out of our comfort zone. But it also dignifies us, because it shows that God trusts in our ability to respond, grow, and take charge of our own journey. The problem is that most of us confuse silence with indifference. But in the Gospels, Jesus' silence is never empty. It is full of intention. It is a pedagogical silence. A silence that teaches more than long speeches. A silence that respects the other person's time and does not force internal processes. Jesus understands that certain revelations only make sense after a person has gone through the discomfort of their own reflection. This completely changes how we interpret moments when God seems distant. Perhaps he is not distant, but too close, waiting for the question to do the work that needs to be done within us. Perhaps the answer hasn't come yet because the heart is still too busy defending old certainties. Silence creates space, and space is necessary for transformation. When faith pierces through this silence, it becomes less fragile. It doesn't depend solely on visible signs or immediate answers. It learns to walk even without apparent guarantees. And this generates a profound impact on how we deal with life, with losses, with difficult decisions, and with the future. Faith built in silence is more mature because it was born from the choice to trust even when everything seemed uncertain. Jesus knew exactly what he was doing by allowing that space to exist. He wasn't being evasive, he was being formative. The silence between the question and the answer is where the disciple ceases to be merely a listener and becomes someone conscious of their own faith. It is there that the person realizes that following Jesus is not just about receiving instructions, but about learning to live with discernment, courage, and spiritual responsibility. And the more we observe this pattern, the more we realize that this silence is not an obstacle on the path of faith, but an essential part of it. It prepares the ground for deeper revelations, for answers that make sense because they find a ready heart. And it is precisely at this point that this conversation begins to touch on something even more sensitive, because understanding Jesus' silence completely changes the way we interpret the questions he continues to ask today. Comment below, "This makes sense to me." Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject, because when we begin to observe Jesus' questions more closely, we realize that they function as true spiritual mirrors. They are not neutral or generic questions. They reflect something very specific in the person who hears them. They reveal hidden layers, the backstage of the soul that almost never comes to the surface in superficial conversations or automatic religious practices. It's as if Jesus were less interested in what the person says aloud and much more attentive to what they carry inside. When he asks, something stirs within. Pride appears disguised as spiritual security. Fear arises camouflaged as prudence. Ambition reveals itself behind a seemingly pious question. And sometimes, genuine love also manifests itself, even if mixed with fragility and doubt. Jesus' questions don't create these things, they only reveal them. They pull back the curtain and show what was already there, hidden deep in the heart. This is a point that has an impact because it reminds us that the true spiritual journey doesn't happen on stage, but behind the scenes. It's not in what we show, but in what we face alone. Jesus' questions reach exactly that place. When he asks, "Why are you so afraid?" or "Do you love me?" he's not seeking information. He's leading the person to see themselves without masks, without prepared speeches, without the protection of external religiosity. There's a hidden truth in all of this that can be uncomfortable. Often, we prefer answers because they don't expose us. An answer can be accepted, repeated, and even shared without anything needing to change internally. A well-phrased question, however, demands honesty. It forces the person to deal with inconsistencies, fragile faith, and conflicting desires. And we're not always ready for that internal confrontation. Jesus' questions cut through the surface and get to where it really matters. They reveal whether faith is merely inherited or truly lived. They reveal whether we follow out of conviction or convenience. They reveal whether we truly trust or only while everything is under control. This kind of revelation doesn't happen noisily. It happens in silence, in reflection, in that moment when no one is watching, but something within us has been deeply touched. That's why so many people felt disconcerted by Jesus' questions. Not because he was confusing, but because he was too clear. Clear to the point of exposing what a person might have spent their whole life avoiding seeing. And this continues to happen today. Jesus' questions still reach us, still confront us, still reveal what truly drives our decisions, our choices, and our way of living our faith. When we understand this, we realize that spiritual growth isn't just about learning new things, but about allowing old truths to be revisited. Jesus' questions not only teach, they reposition. They challenge our mindset, the way we see ourselves and how we see God. They reveal whether we are seeking transformation or just spiritual comfort. In the depths of the soul, where no one applauds and no one judges, these questions continue to echo. Why do you do what you do? What do you really expect from me? How far does your trust go? These are not questions meant to generate guilt, but awareness. Jesus doesn't expose to condemn, he reveals to heal. But healing only happens when there is a willingness to look honestly within. And that's where the emotional impact deepens, because everyone carries unresolved issues, silent fears, unspoken expectations. Jesus' questions touch precisely on these sensitive points. They don't just deal with what we do, but with who we are becoming along the journey. And when that starts to become clear, faith ceases to be just an abstract belief and becomes a living path, full of real decisions and internal consequences. Perhaps that is why these questions remain so relevant. They do not age, because the human heart continues to face the same conflicts, the same insecurities, and the same desires throughout the centuries. Jesus' questions transcend time because they transcend humanity. They reveal what is hidden, not to shame us, but to lead us to a truer faith, less performative and more rooted. As we delve deeper into this reflection, an even more profound understanding begins to emerge. If the questions reveal who we are, they also point to who we can become. They open up space for change, maturation, and inner transformation. And when this process begins, something essential stirs within us, preparing the ground for us to understand not only what Jesus was asking, but why he chose to ask it in exactly that way. Comment below, "This makes sense to me." Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject, because all of this leads us to an inevitable realization. Jesus' questions were not confined to the pages of the Gospels, nor limited to that time and those people. They remain alive. They continue to echo. They continue to cross generations and reach those who are willing to read, listen, and reflect with an open heart. In a way, Jesus still asks questions today, not in an audible voice, but in the quietest and most decisive space of our existence. When someone comes into contact with the words of Jesus, they don't emerge unscathed. Even if they don't realize it immediately, something begins to stir within. The questions don't demand instant answers, but accompany the person throughout the journey. They arise at unexpected moments, when a decision needs to be made, when a loss occurs, when faith is put to the test, or when life demands a repositioning. It is at this point that it becomes clear that these questions are not merely theological, but profoundly existential. There is an implicit invitation in every question Jesus asks, an invitation to awareness, an invitation to spiritual responsibility, an invitation to break free from autopilot and embrace a more mature faith, less dependent on ready-made answers and more connected to inner truth. Jesus doesn't ask to confuse, but to awaken. He doesn't question to weaken faith, but to strengthen it through conscious choices and not just inherited traditions. This invitation is relevant today because humanity continues to face the same internal dilemmas: fear of the future, desire for control, search for meaning, need for belonging, conflicts between faith and reality. Jesus' questions touch upon all of this and place us before a mirror that reveals not only who we are, but who we are becoming. They challenge our mindset, expose the inner workings of our decisions, and reveal whether we are living a vibrant faith or merely repeating a learned discourse. When Jesus asks today, he continues to respect the process. He doesn't force answers. He doesn't rush time. He allows the question to walk with us, mature within us, and lead us to choices more aligned with the truth. This method is profoundly transformative because it doesn't create dependence, it creates maturity. It doesn't form passive followers. It forms people aware of their own spiritual journey. Perhaps that's why so many people are bothered by Jesus' questions. They aren't limited to the realm of belief. They invade daily life. They question priorities, confront decisions, and demand consistency between what one professes to believe and how one lives. And this has an impact because it stirs internal structures that we prefer not to touch. But it is precisely there that faith ceases to be superficial and begins to become real. What's most striking is realizing that understanding Jesus' questions is only the beginning. Each question opens a door to a greater, deeper, more personal revelation. It's not a destination, it's a starting point. The question initiates a process that continues to unfold throughout life, shaping choices, adjusting routes, and deepening the relationship with God. The more a person allows themselves to walk with these questions, the more they realize that faith is not a fixed destination, but a journey in constant construction. There is something profoundly liberating in this, knowing that we don't need to have all the answers to move forward, that doubts don't negate faith, but can strengthen it when faced honestly. That silence, reflection, and inner confrontation are part of a thoughtfully designed spiritual learning process. Jesus doesn't improvise. He guides, and each question is a carefully used tool to form something solid within. As this awareness grows, a natural expectation begins to emerge. If the questions reveal so much about us and remain so relevant, what else are they pointing to? What happens when we begin to answer not only with words, but with attitudes, decisions, and real changes? It is at this point that the conversation deepens even further, because understanding that Jesus still asks questions today prepares us to realize that each answer given shapes the path we follow from here on out. Comment below, "I'm on this journey too." If you've made it this far, it's because this conversation has truly resonated with you on some level, and that says a lot. This type of reflection only makes sense when we walk together, calmly, deeply, and with space to think. If this content helped you see something new, or organize thoughts that were already there, it's worth subscribing to the channel to continue receiving this type of message, at the same pace with the same goal of going beyond the surface. If you feel like it, leave a comment saying this message was for me, just so I know you stayed until the end and that it resonated with you. And if at any point you felt a connection, a click on the like button helps this video reach other people who are also on this journey, just like you are now. There's a video over here that complements this topic and delves even deeper into this conversation. Click on it and continue reading with me there.